Hello, everyone. Welcome to another delightful exercise in improv. Now, there are a couple of stories and premises I came up with before I filmed this, but I came up with this one recently, today actually, and I thought maybe I should explore it. Basically, I came up with the premise of the story, characters, ending, plot twist, that sort of stuff, because it became apparent after releasing the first goth ASMR video I did, was that you guys expected a plot twist. And I thought maybe it was just nice to have like a straightforward story, but you guys wanted a plot twist, so I thought maybe I should add a plot twist. Also, if you're wondering why the pop filter, the windshield on this mic looks like this, it's because this used to be Kaya's microphone for live streaming, and she would rub her face on it. That's why it's covered in foundation. Now, I don't know if I should tell this first person, third person, as like a guided story where you are the main character. So the tense of the telling is probably going to change throughout the story, so let's not be too anal about it. Michael opens his eyes to see the sunlight beaming in through the window to his right and splashing against the wall that his bed lies against. He rolls over to his right and gazes out of the window. Before him is an aerial view of a metropolis, a quintessential picture of modern society, akin to New York or London. He switches off his alarm, which initially woke him up, and he rolls out of bed. A finely pressed suit awaits him on an armchair in his living room. He gets dressed ceremoniously, as he has done for many years, because Michael works at one of the biggest law firms in the entire city, and his presentation needs to be impeccable. He forgets breakfast, as he usually does, because he likes to get food on the way from his favorite deli. Michael, like all days, is distracted because, as all days, he can only think of one thing, and her name is Andrea. He absent-mindedly accepts his breakfast wrap, from the woman behind the counter, while he is deep in thought with his recent interactions with Andrea. Every day, it seems like he is working a little bit closer to having a more intimate relationship with Andrea, and he wonders what new level they will reach today. He wonders if he'll ever have the courage to truly ask her out. "Hey Andrea, I wonder if you're not too busy," he rehearses in his mind, but the mere thought of possibly ruining such flirtatious interactions in the workplace immediately puts him off. He strides up the wide steps leading into the skyscraper law firm, through the revolving doors, says hello to Willie, the security guard, and enters the elevator. He turns around and watches the doors close, but just before they close, a woman's voice is heard. It's a voice that immediately strickens him with anxiety, but also excitement, because it is the voice of Andrea. He presses the button that opens the elevator doors again, and she walks in and stands right next to him. Just as he begins to say good morning to Andrea, a much larger group of business corporate types shuffle into the elevator. They crowd around Michael, but seem to push Andrea out of the way. More, she moved of her own free will as they entered, as if to make room. Andrea is now standing right behind Michael in the now crowded elevator. She's standing so close. You can almost feel her breathing. As the elevator begins to ascend to the 70th floor, Michael can feel Andrea getting closer behind him. And around the 30th floor, he actually feels her cheek resting on his back. Feelings of lust and romance fill his heart, and he decides that today is indeed the day that he will ask Andrea out. I have no idea where I'm going with this. Okay, the LED display inside of the elevator reads 68, 69, 70. The doors open, and they both walk out into the main floor. Michael walks over to his desk to find a stack of legal papers that had been placed there by the secretary earlier that morning. He flicks through the dull legal documents to see nothing out of the ordinary, wishing that perhaps just once his boss would give him something challenging so that he could prove himself and move up a couple of floors. He switches on his computer, and the screen flickers to life, and he switches on a small downward-facing desk lamp so that he can better read the documents that are strewn around his table. But suddenly the lights and the screen begin to flicker as if broken. He has lodged a ticket with maintenance, but they never seem to find anything wrong with his devices. Just as he begins to write yet another email to maintenance, he realizes that Andrea is standing there peering into his cubicle. He ignores the flickering computer screen and draws his attention to her, and so continues the workplace flirting that they both seem to enjoy so much, yet both so terrified of ruining it by taking their relationship a step further. Michael has been single for a very long time. His last girlfriend had actually left him for another man, which had emotionally scarred him for quite some time, more than he would care to admit. But he always thought to himself that if he was ever going to commit to another woman, It was going to be Andrea. They liked all the same things. She was remarkably beautiful, but none of the other men ever seemed to approach her. She always seemed to be alone, and for large periods of the day, she would actually disappear completely. Right, I know where I'm going with the story. I just need to get there, right? And it needs to make sense to some degree. So let's see. Andrea bids him a good day and disappears off. He's not entirely sure where, but she does go back to wherever it is that she works. Michael then proceeds to enter all of his clients' details into his account. Half the day has passed, and it's time for Michael's lunch break. He heads over to the water cooler and pours himself a drink before he heads off to go eat. He feels a cold draft of air on the back of his neck, subtle but enough for him to actually reach back and rub the back of his head, and that's when he heard Andrea's voice. Assuming that she had simply flirtatiously blown on the back of his head, he turns around and says, "Oh, hi, Andrea." He asks how her day has been, and she answers innocuously. Andrea asks if he's going to be eating in today in the cafeteria that's located on the 30th floor. He replied no, stating that he was actually going to be going out to the local deli, because he did not have enough time to prepare his own food this morning. Andrea seemed very sad, but Michael just asked, "Why don't you come with me?" She quickly declines, looks at the floor, and says that she will see him when he gets back. Michael, confused, proceeds to go over to the elevator and exit the building. As he exits the building, his eyes quickly scan a plaque that is screwed to the wall that encloses the entrance to the building. He's never truly read it, but it seems to be a memoriam for someone who had dedicated their time or their money or their lives to this building, perhaps referring to the original owner of the law firm, which had now been taken over by the firm owner's son. Michael gets his lunch and eats it on the bench outside before going back through the revolving door into the elevator and back to the 70th floor. As he arrives, he walks into Andrea yet again, as if she knows exactly where he is at all times. This doesn't bother Michael, though, because he always loves to see her. As he begins to talk to Andrea in his usual flirtatious way, a colleague walks up behind Michael and down the preceding hallway. He almost walks directly into Andrea. How rude, he thinks, and she shuffles out of the way quickly. Andrea and Michael begin to chat idly when suddenly he breaks through the monotony with his question. "Andrea, I've been meaning to ask you, but I've been so terrified of what your answer would be. I so thoroughly enjoy the relationship we have here at work, and I would hate to ruin that. But the idea of our relationship going no further brings me such sadness. So I was wondering if perhaps you would like to go out with me, perhaps this Friday." Andrea's face drops, and her eyes begin to mist over. Michael worries that she's about to cry, that he has indeed ruined the relationship that they had. Andrea quickly snaps to a smile and brushes off his invitation, saying that she couldn't possibly go because she's actually busy this Friday, but she would love to go out with him again next Friday. The work week passes, and Michael sits in on the Friday that he invited her out because he had actually made that day vacant, because he assumed that she was going to say yes. He casually drinks his way through the weekend, and on Monday, goes back to work and sees Andrea yet again. He meets Andrea on the 70th floor hallway, as they usually do. He takes a seat in his cubicle, and his computer starts up as normal. No flickering this time. It works just as intended. After more monotonous law firm work, he stands up and walks over to the water cooler, where he sees Andrea taking a drink. He engages her and says, "Are you excited for this Friday?" Her eyes look worried, but her mouth is smiling, and she agrees that she is in fact very excited for the coming Friday. As the days go on throughout the week, Michael sees less and less of Andrea until he sees her again on Friday afternoon. He goes over, places his hand on her back, and begins to gush about the night that he has planned for the two of them. Nothing special, just his favorite restaurant and a movie that he has been dying to see. Again, her eyes are worried, but she smiles through worried eyes and agrees that she is excited and cannot wait to go to his favorite restaurant and take their relationship to the next level. The day ends, and he returns home and changes out his work suit for another suit. Michael is a formal man through and through. His father taught him that the only way to be presentable is in a three-piece suit. He takes an early evening cab to his favorite restaurant. The waiter greets him at the door, and Michael is very excited. The waiter, grinning at Michael's expression, says, "Did you finally ask her? Is she coming today?" Michael nods with a subtle excitement, and the waiter beams and says that he cannot wait to meet this girl that Michael always seems to be talking about. The waiter takes Michael over to his table and proceeds to bring over water and bread for the table. 30 minutes pass. It's now the time when Andrea is meant to meet him. His phone now on the table facing up. He continuously turns on the home screen to check the time. 7:30. 7:31. 7:35. 7:45. 8:45. 8 p.m. The waiter comes over to talk to Michael, having scanned his facial expression. Is she late? He asks. Yeah, but she'll be here, Michael assures him. 8:15, 8:30. The movie starts in 15 minutes. Michael, with his head hanging, takes his phone, puts it in his pocket, tips the waiter, and exits the restaurant. He takes out his phone and opens his social media in futility because he realizes that he's never added her on anything. He has no phone number, no Facebook, no Instagram, nothing. So he has no way to contact her. How could he be so stupid as to not ask what her number was? Michael's issue with trust begins to rear its ugly head, and he shrugs them off, steels his nerves, and proceeds to the cinema, where he hopes that he will see Andrea, who is probably caught up in traffic or something. He arrives at the cinema and, to his dismay, there is no Andrea. With sadness painted on his face, he collects his ticket from the kiosk and proceeds to the very dark room to go watch the movie. The weekend passes and not a moment is spent not thinking about Andrea. His mind races of all the things that could possibly have gone wrong. A car accident. She forgot. She changed her mind. All circumstances could be correct or incorrect until he sees her again on Monday because he has no way to contact her, find out what happened. Okay, I'm trying to think of how I can get to the main bit, like the plot twist of this story without it being stupid. Oh, I got it. Okay, I know exactly where to go with this. Okay, Michael enters the building, nods at Willie the security guard, and proceeds to the elevator. He expectantly looks around just as the elevator doors close, assuming that he's going to see Andrea, as he does every day. But she never shows. Instead, the familiar shuffling mass of corporate suits enter the elevator. He stands there in a packed elevator, feeling alone. As he arrives on the 70th floor, he exits out onto the hallway, expecting to see Andrea there, assuming that she had arrived early. And she's not there. He goes to his cubicle and still nothing. She's not leaning on his cubicle looking in. She's not over by the water fountain. He stands up and leans over to his colleague and asks, has anyone seen Andrea today? His colleague's face switches to one of confusion, and he replies, I don't know anyone called Andrea. Michael proceeds to describe her appearance, and his colleague still seems all the more confused. Confusion now shared by Michael, as he's always with Andrea. How could no one have seen her? How could no one know who she is? He shrugs off his concern and instead decides to bury himself in work for the day, as though not to over-worry, as he has done all weekend. His hand of its own volition reaches over to the spot where he usually finds all of his case papers, but instead, there's a USB drive. On the USB drive is a piece of paper that has been sellotaped on, and the paper reads, Personnel Files, 1972. Curiosity gets the better of Michael, and he plugs the USB into his computer. The file name appears on the screen. Personnel Files, 1972. He double-clicks and enters a spreadsheet, an unassuming, average, everyday spreadsheet, which seems to display all of the names of the employees that used to work for the firm in 1972. The tables are as follows: name, date they started, the sector that they worked in, the date they left, and also the reason for termination. Seeing this is relatively interesting and something to keep his mind off of Andrea. He proceeds to scroll through. He picks out random names to read in his head, like David Smith. Started work 1972 in January. He was a lawyer, much like Michael, and his employment was terminated later that year, as he had had an affair with one of his clients. He continues to read and pick out random names: Julian Andrews, Mark White, Susan Burkhardt. But then a name immediately catches his eye. It's Andrea's name. Not phasing him for a second, assuming that it was just an employee with the same name, proceeds to read the other tables next to her name. She had joined the firm in 1968, and she worked in the secretary department. She had been a model employee. But then he reads the end date of her employment with the company. On May 16th, 1972, she was terminated from the company. Her reason for leaving was suicide. The file states that she had jumped off the top of the building following problems at home and work getting the best of her. A sharp feeling of shock washes over Michael that he quickly brushes off, assuming that it's an employee of the same name. Because how could it be the same Andrea? The year is 2019, and she is his age. He needs to get some fresh air to clear his mind. He was already worried about Andrea not showing to the movie theater, and now he was stressed about what he had read on this USB drive. He exits the building through the revolving doors, takes a sharp left, and takes a seat just at the entrance of the doors. Directly in front of him is the plaque that he now takes the time to read, in loving memory of Andrea. There's no way that this is the same Andrea. The plaque is definitely referring to the Andrea in the file that he had read, but there's no way this is his Andrea. He returns into the building and proceeds up to the 72nd floor. On that floor is the databases, files on all current and previous employees, CCTV footage, maintenance tickets for the computers downstairs. He puts his key card to the card scanner to enter the floor, but he's denied. Just as he was about to return to the elevator, he hears one of the servicemen approaching the door. He presses his body against the wall behind the door, and as the door opens, the men leave, talking to each other about unassuming service work, possibly about the broken computers he's been complaining about. The men don't see him, and he holds the door open and lets himself in. Because the door is electronically locked, the men left all the doors and the computers open. There's a very large server room, and in the server room are several computers. He sneaks through this city of servers. Computer noises and fans can be heard echoing throughout the entire room. He approaches one of the computers, sits down, and enters the database. He enters the CCTV footage files and proceeds to search for May 16th, 1972, and looks through all of the cameras on the 70th floor. The rest of the day seems to be missing. It seems to start from the afternoon, and he's scanning all of the employees on the screen to see if he can see Andrea, who he knows to be Andrea, just so that he can put his mind to rest and not feel like he's going crazy. The CCTV camera is positioned just above the door. It looks out on the 70th floor, windows with the light gleaming in from the sun, bathing all the employees in light who are currently hard at work. He sits there and scrubs through the footage for about 10 minutes, when suddenly the entire floor of employees erupts. He stops the fast forward and rewinds to just before all of the employees in the room simultaneously stand. His eyes are fixated on the screen, and he presses play to see what happened. After several seconds, a shadow moves very quickly downwards outside the windows. Michael grips his mouth in shock. That must have been when Andrea threw herself off of the building. He rewinds the footage again to see if he can make out her face, but it's no use. It's just a blur, just the blur of a young woman plunging to her death. Michael's hands are shaking at witnessing the suicide of this poor woman. He sits back in the chair, exhales, and decides to put it in the back of his mind. But just as he is about to leave, one more idea enters his head. He decides to look at the CCTV camera footage for the roof. He almost doesn't want to look. Again, not all of the footage is there, and as the static eases, he can indeed see very clearly the back of a woman standing on the edge of the building. Her hands are running through her hair in utter despair. Still in utter denial that it actually is the Andrea that he knows, he still proceeds to watch just to make sure. They share the same name, and now he knows they also share the same hair. Michael scrubs through the footage and then stops immediately, and a cold dread washes over his entire body. His eyes are now tunnel-visioned out of sheer shock. He stopped just as the woman turned around to reveal it was, in fact, the Andrea that he knew. His eyes are wild and open, filling with tears, still gripping his mouth in shock. He leans back in his chair and vigorously runs his fingers through his hair and clasps his hands behind his head. And then a voice appears behind Michael. A voice he hasn't heard since Friday afternoon. It's Andrea. "So now you know why I missed our date," she playfully says. Michael flinches heavily, nearly knocking the computer screen over. He cowers against the desk, now knowing what he's looking at. He has been flirting and talking to the ghost of a woman who killed herself in 1972. He now realizes why she always seemed to shuffle out of everyone's way, how no one seems to know who she is, why she never joined him for lunch. With tears in her eyes, she explains, "I was going through a really hard time. My boss was sexually harassing me. My husband had left me for another woman, and the job had trapped me. I couldn't leave, so the only thing I had left in my power was my own life. So I jumped. And I died, and my soul slept here for many decades until you arrived 5 years ago. For some reason, you woke me up, and I liked you the moment I saw you, and I wanted to see you every day, even if it meant living as a ghost." She reaches out and touches his hand. It's cold, as always, but now he knows why. She proceeds to say, "If I could go back, I would do it again. I never would have met someone as amazing as you." Michael understands her situation. He also lost the love of his life to someone else. He is stuck in a job he does not want to do, and the only woman that he loves at this very moment is dead. She can never leave. They could never move away together. They could never have children. They could never get married. They'll never have a normal life. But Michael knows that that is all he wants. All he wants is Andrea. Michael now knows what he must do. A look of calm washes over his face. He stands up and power walks to the elevator and exits the floor. Andrea looks on as he leaves in confusion. He presses the button for the roof and stands there, calmly, as the elevator ascends all the way to the top of this 100-floor building. The doors open. A maintenance tunnel is before him. He takes aggressive strides forwards and smashes open the fire escape, where he is greeted by the blinding light of the sun beaming down on the roof. His eyes dart over to the exact spot where Andrea had stood and flung herself off the building. He calmly walks over while removing his tie and his shoes. He climbs up onto the ledge, looks down for but a moment, feels the sickening fear of heights wash over him, but he brings his eyes up again and looks out over the horizon, the sun now setting, marking the end of his workday. He takes a deep breath, turns around slowly, and sees Andrea standing at his feet, looking up at him. He crouches down, kisses her forehead, and says, "I'll be back soon." He stands up, holds out his arms either side, and proceeds to fall backwards. As his heels leave the ledge and he begins to fall, he looks up and sees Andrea peering over the ledge down at him as he falls. A feeling of utter peace washes over him. He never feels the impact, as if he died long before he hit the floor. A flash of white light, then darkness, then an overwhelming sense of tiredness and resolve and peacefulness, a feeling of disorientation, like he doesn't know if he's upside down or facing up or facing down. Then suddenly he opens his eyes like he used to every morning before he went to work, and he's back on the roof, peering at the back of Andrea, who was still looking down, looking at the commotion down below where his body had fallen. She's weeping. A feeling of utter happiness washes over Michael as he says, "Hi, Andrea." She turns around and runs into his arms, and they embrace. Oh, that was good, right? Or not? Was it bad? I don't know. I haven't edited this yet. So yeah, you guys wanted a plot twist, and I gave you one. It was a little bit transparent, you know, because I was making it up on the spot. So there wasn't really any space for me to make different drafts. So I wouldn't be surprised if a couple of you knew what was coming. Hopefully you liked the ending. Just one last thing before I go. If you want to get your name at the end of each of my videos, like that you've seen, then all you need to do is simply pledge $1 on Patreon, and you get your name at the end of the video. And also for $10, you can get my audiobooks. So make sure you check out my Patreon, see if there's anything on there that takes your fancy. So yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in. I had a great day today because I made it a great day, and I will see you in the next video.